The late spring sun cast a golden glow over the sprawling lawn, where strings of fairy lights swayed gently in the evening breeze. Adeline's 22nd birthday was in full swing, with laughter and music mingling under the open sky. Among the crowd, Rose stood out, her elegance and warm smile radiating effortlessly, even at 43. She wore a soft lavender dress that hugged her figure, her chestnut brown hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Adeline beamed when she saw Rose approaching. "Aunt Rose! You made it!" She hugged her tightly, as though the years of love between them could be expressed in one embrace. "Of course. I wouldn't miss your day for anything," Rose replied, her voice rich with affection. From the doorway, Ava's lips tightened into a thin line. Her dislike for Rose was palpable, though she tried to mask it behind a curt nod. Brian, standing beside her, wore a polite smile, though his stiff posture betrayed his true feelings. As the party continued, Adeline realized her phone was missing. Excusing herself, she slipped into the quiet house, the sudden silence almost jarring after the lively outdoors. In the dimly lit living room, she spotted her phone on the coffee table. As she reached for it, her gaze landed on a leather-bound diary peeking out of Rose's bag nearby. Curiosity tugged at her. Rose had always been an enigma, a beautiful soul who had never married. What secrets could this diary hold? Without thinking, Adeline opened her phone camera and carefully turned the pages, snapping photos of the elegant handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly, but she managed to capture enough before placing the diary exactly as it was. Returning to the party, Adeline felt a strange mix of excitement and guilt. The weight of what she had done lingered, but so did the anticipation of uncovering the hidden pieces of Rose's life. The sound of laughter and music drifted into the evening air as Adeline grabbed Rose's hand and pulled her toward the lawn. "Dance with me, Aunt Rose," she said, her eyes twinkling. Rose hesitated, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "You know I'm no dancer, Adeline." Adeline waved her off. "Nonsense! Just follow my lead." They moved to the rhythm of the music, and soon Adeline's friends joined them, spinning and laughing as they surrounded her. Rose stepped back, her heart warm, but her place clear. She had always felt a little out of sync in gatherings like this. Before retreating to her room, Rose made a deliberate stop near Eva, who stood by the refreshments table, her arms crossed. "Thank you for letting me come, Eva," Rose said softly. Eva didn't look at her. "I didn't do it for you. Adeline wanted you here, that's all." The words were sharp, and Rose's smile faltered. She nodded, masking the sting of rejection, and quietly made her way upstairs. Once in her room, she let out a sigh and sank onto the bed. Her eyes wandered to her bag, where her diary was tucked. A strange sensation pricked at her. Something was off. The diary was exactly where she'd left it, but the leather cover seemed slightly smudged, the corners not perfectly aligned. She opened the bag, checked the diary carefully, and then closed it with a determined snap. She slipped it into her bag, securing it tightly this time. The unease lingered, but she shook it off, trying to focus on the joy of seeing Adeline again after so long. Dinner came and went, the party winding down as the guests dispersed. After locking her door for the night, Rose sat at her desk, opened her diary, and began writing under the soft glow of her desk lamp. "Today, I felt alive again. Seeing Adeline after so many months reminded me how much I've missed her. She has a way of making me feel young again, as though I belong in this family, even when I know I don't." Her pen paused before pressing forward. "But then there's Brian. I still get lost in his eyes. Those eyes I tried to forget, but they're burned into me. I've spent years hiding my feelings, and I will keep hiding them, for Eva and Adeline's sake." She bit her lip and stared at the ink drying on the page. After a deep breath, she wrote again. I love them all. Eva, Adeline, even Brian. But Adeline is the only one who truly understands me. The scratch of her pen stopped abruptly. A faint noise came from the hallway, like footsteps nearing her door. Her pulse quickened. Snapping the diary shut, she slid it into her bag and zipped it. A soft knock followed. Rose, Aunt? Adeline's voice carried through the door. Rose opened it, a smile breaking through her earlier unease. What is it, dear? Adeline stepped in, her tone warm. Thank you for coming. I miss you so much when you're not around. Rose's heart softened. Thank you for inviting me, my love. It means more than you know. Adeline's smile grew mischievous. I'm planning a picnic near the hill tomorrow with my friends. You have to come with us. Rose hesitated, her eyes narrowing playfully. Adeline, I'm hardly picnic company for a group of teenagers. Nonsense! Adeline clasped her hands dramatically. Please, for me? Rose sighed but smiled. All right, for you. Adeline squealed in delight, hugging her tightly before bouncing out of the room. As she left, her gaze briefly flicked to the bag on the desk. The diary was gone from where she'd seen it earlier. A curious smirk played on her lips as she closed the door behind her. The room felt smaller as Adeline sat on her bed, clutching the worn diary to her chest. A faint breeze from the open window stirred the curtains, and the muffled sounds of her parents' conversation downstairs seemed miles away. With trembling fingers, she opened the diary to the beginning of Rose's story, its faded ink carrying her into a world long before she was born. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, steadying herself. Then, taking a deep breath, she crawled under the covers and began to read. I was 16 when I joined college, sharing the experience with my sister Ava. We were inseparable, more than just siblings, best friends. Ava was quieter, more introspective, while I thrived in crowds, an extrovert who could charm my way into any conversation. I thought nothing could come between us. Adeline's lips parted as she read the younger version of Rose's thoughts. She could almost picture her aunt, youthful and carefree, navigating the hallways of a college that must have felt enormous. And then I saw him. Brian. The name seemed to leap off the page, and Adeline's heart skipped a beat. She continued reading, her pulse quickening. I still remember the way the sunlight caught his hair that first day, the way he laughed with his friends like the world existed only for him. He was handsome, of course, tall, with broad shoulders and a smile that could stop time. But there was more to him, something warm and magnetic that drew everyone in, including me. For the first time, I felt shy. Me, Rose, the girl who could talk her way into or out of anything, found myself staring at Brian from afar, too nervous to approach him. It was infuriating. Every day, I found excuses to linger in the hallways he frequented, hoping for a chance to say something, anything. But I never did. Instead, I watched him, my heart racing whenever he was near. Adeline smiled faintly, imagining her bold aunt reduced to a shy girl with a crush. She turned the page, eager to know more. One day, the students in my class organized a picnic. Everyone was invited, including Brian. I saw it as my chance, a fresh start, a way to finally break through my hesitation. Ava and I packed our bags together. She wasn't thrilled about going. She'd always preferred quiet evenings at home to social gatherings, but I convinced her, promising it would be fun. She agreed, more for my sake than hers. The picnic spot was beautiful, rolling green hills under a bright blue sky. I was in my element, laughing and chatting with friends, while Eva lingered at the edges of the crowd, her introverted nature keeping her at a distance. I should have noticed her discomfort, but I was too focused on my mission, talking to Brian. Adeline felt a pang of sympathy for Eva, imagining her young mother standing awkwardly apart while her sister basked in the attention of friends. I finally worked up the courage to approach him. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to smile as I started a conversation. To my surprise, Brian seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for what felt like hours, about everything and nothing, and I felt an unfamiliar thrill, a connection I'd never experienced before. Later, when the music started and everyone began dancing, Brian asked me to dance. Me. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world as he took my hand and spun me around. For a brief moment, it felt like we were the only two people there. From that day on, we became friends, best friends. Eva, Brian, and I formed a trio, inseparable both in and out of college. It was perfect. Or so I thought. Adeline turned the page, her breath catching as the tone of the diary shifted. A few weeks later, I fell ill, a fever that kept me bedridden for days. When I finally returned to college, I noticed something had changed. Brian and Eva were closer than before, laughing at inside jokes I didn't understand, sharing glances that made my stomach churn. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but the more I watched them, the more obvious it became. Eva liked Brian, more than liked him. And worse, he seemed to like her back. Adeline's heart ached for the younger Rose, the betrayal clear in every word. She could almost see her aunt lying in bed, the weight of jealousy pressing down on her. I tried to brush it off, to pretend it didn't matter, but the truth was, it did. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. Eva had always been the quieter one, the one who stayed in my shadow. But on social media, she shone in ways I never could. She had a growing following, people who admired her for her creativity and wit. And now, it seemed, she had Brian's admiration too. One day, she posted a video of her dancing with Brian at a college event. It went viral, garnering hundreds of likes and comments. She was thrilled, but I felt a knot tighten in my chest. It wasn't just the video. It was the way they looked at each other, the way he smiled at her in a way he'd never smiled at me. Adeline paused, her fingers brushing the edge of the page. She couldn't imagine the pain Rose must have felt, watching her sister and the boy she liked grow closer. I couldn't keep it in any longer. One day I confronted Eva. "You love Brian, don't you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She hesitated, then said, "I like him, but I'm not sure about love." I felt a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. Her words only confirmed what I already knew, that she had feelings for him, even if she didn't fully understand them. I tried to focus on my own connection with Brian, to win back the bond we'd shared. But Eva wasn't blind. She saw my efforts, and though she never said anything, I knew she felt it too. That unspoken tension between us. She never confronted me, though. She loved me too much to risk losing me. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. Adeline closed the diary, her hands shaking. The story felt raw, real, and painfully close. She had always known there was tension between her mother and Rose, but she had never understood its origins, until now. The past had cast long shadows over their family, and for the first time, Adeline realized how deep those shadows went. Adeline's grip on the diary tightened, her breath shallow as she turned to the next page. She knew the story wasn't over, but she couldn't have prepared herself for what came next. Her heart pounded as she continued to read the painful truth unfolding before her eyes. It all started with a single question. One afternoon, Brian approached Eva in the campus garden. I wasn't there, but I heard it from a friend later. He asked her to be his date for prom night, and she said yes. The words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I had always imagined Brian asking me, picturing the two of us dancing under the glittering lights. But Eva? My own sister? She knew how I felt, yet she agreed. I tried to act normal, but when I heard the news, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal and jealousy. I had to know why she would do this. I confronted her that evening, forcing a smile as I asked, "So, you're going with Brian to prom?" She hesitated, then nodded, her face a mix of excitement and guilt. "He asked me, Rose. I couldn't say no." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. She didn't say it outright, but I could see it in her eyes. She liked him. Maybe even loved him. And Brian liked her too. For the next few days, I told myself to let it go. But the thought of them together haunted me. I knew I couldn't stop them from going. But I could stop their story from unfolding. Adeline felt a chill run down her spine. Rose's words carried a desperation she'd never seen in her aunt before. She turned the page, her hands trembling. With only a week left before prom, I decided to act. If Eva wanted to take Brian from me, then I would take something from her in return. I started by pretending to be happy for them. "You'll look amazing together," I told Eva, plastering a fake smile on my face. She seemed relieved, even grateful, that I was supportive. It made her trust me, which was exactly what I needed. Over the next few days, I began paying close attention to her habits, especially her social media. Eva was always on her phone, posting pictures, replying to comments, and updating her followers about her life. And she wasn't exactly careful with her passwords. It didn't take long for me to figure it out. One evening, while she was in the shower, I used her phone to confirm it. The password worked. My hands shook as I logged into her account on my own device. I knew what I was about to do was wrong, but my jealousy drowned out the guilt. Adeline's stomach churned as she read, the weight of Rose's actions pressing down on her. The post I wrote was simple but damning. I claimed that Brian had pressured Eva into going to prom with him, framing it in a way that made him look controlling and manipulative. I hesitated for a moment before hitting post, but once it was done, there was no turning back. The fallout was immediate. Brian saw the post within hours and confronted Eva the next day. I wasn't there to witness it, but I could hear their raised voices from across the campus. He was furious, and no matter how much she tried to explain, he wouldn't believe her. Eva came home that evening, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say a word to me, but I could feel her pain radiating through the room. I should have felt satisfied, but instead, I felt hollow. The next day, my carefully crafted plan began to unravel. Brian caught me logging out of Eva's account on my phone. His face darkened as he asked, "You use social media? I thought you didn't have an account." I stammered, my mind racing for an excuse. "I'm trying to start one," I said, forcing a laugh. He didn't buy it. "Let me help you set it up," he offered, reaching for my phone. I panicked and pulled away, mumbling something about doing it myself before running off. But it was too late. His suspicion was piqued. That evening, Eva confronted me. She had followed me and seen me using her account. Her voice shook as she demanded, "Did you post that about Brian?" I couldn't lie anymore. I broke down, confessing everything. The look on her face was worse than anger. It was heartbreak. She didn't yell or cry. She simply walked away. Brian stopped talking to me after that. But the real loss was Eva. She wouldn't even look at me. The silence between us was unbearable. I had lost not only Brian, but my sister too. Adeline's chest tightened as she imagined the rift between Rose and Eva. She turned the page, unable to stop herself. Eva deleted her social media after that. She couldn't handle the backlash, the loss of followers, the whispers behind her back. Brian stood by her through it all, helping her rebuild her confidence. I watched from the sidelines, unable to do anything but regret. College ended, and Brian landed a great job. I tried to move on, but every time I saw him and Eva together, it was like a fresh wound reopening. Then one day, he proposed. I should have been happy for them, but all I felt was a crushing sense of loss. Brian was never mine to begin with, but losing Eva was unbearable. I apologized to her, begged her to forgive me, but she couldn't. And I didn't blame her. I had destroyed something precious, and no apology could undo that. Adeline paused, tears brimming in her eyes. The diary was a window into a part of Rose she had never known. A young woman consumed by jealousy, regret, and a love that had cost her everything. She closed the diary for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight of the story was overwhelming, but she knew she couldn't stop now. Rose's past was painful, but it was also the key to understanding her. Adeline reopened the diary, bracing herself for what came next. Adeline's eyes were heavy with emotion, but she couldn't stop now. Rose's story was reaching its climax, and each word pulled her deeper into the life of the woman she thought she knew so well. She turned the page, her heart pounding with anticipation as she read the next entry. Eva and Brian's engagement day was nothing short of magical. The open-air venue, perched on a hill near the edge of a forest, was decorated with soft lights, flowers, and golden drapes that swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked perfect, but I couldn't focus on the celebration. I stood in the shadows, watching the two of them. Eva looked radiant, her smile brighter than the twinkling lights above. Brian stood by her side, his hand resting protectively on her back. They were perfect together. And yet, my heart ached. I had lost them both. My selfishness had cost me my sister, and Brian was never mine to begin with. I wanted to be happy for them, but the pain of my mistakes was too sharp. I felt like a ghost, haunting an event where I no longer belonged. As the night wore on, a storm began to brew. The wind picked up, rattling the trees, and dark clouds rolled across the sky. People whispered nervously, but no one expected what was about to happen. Adeline could almost feel the tension building as she read on. The first sign of danger was the loud snap of trees falling in the distance. Then came the screams. The storm had broken the barricade that separated the forest from the palace grounds. People began to panic, rushing toward the safety of the rooms inside. The once joyous celebration turned into chaos. I stayed behind, watching from the edge of the crowd as a pack of wolves emerged from the shadows of the forest. They were large, wild, and hungry. Eva and Brian were still outside, along with their parents, when the wolves attacked. Everyone else had already fled indoors, locking the doors behind them. I froze, my heart pounding as I saw a massive wolf lunge at Eva. She screamed as its claws raked across her arm, sending her tumbling to the ground. Brian fought bravely, trying to shield her, but he was no match for the wild animals. I knew I couldn't stand by and watch. Without thinking, I ran toward them, my instincts taking over. A larger wolf emerged from the pack, its eyes gleaming with a fierce intelligence. It lunged at the wolf attacking Eva, knocking it to the ground. The two beasts clashed, snarling and biting, as Eva and Brian scrambled to their feet and ran for the safety of the palace. I didn't follow them. Instead, I fought to keep the other wolves at bay until they were gone. The pain and fear were overwhelming, but I couldn't stop. I would do anything to protect Eva, even if she hated me. Adeline's breath caught in her throat. She read on, her hands trembling. When the dust settled and the wolves retreated, I collapsed to the ground. I was weak and bleeding, but I had done it. Eva and Brian were safe. The next morning, I heard whispers that I was missing. People thought the wolves had taken me, and for a moment, I wished they had. But what hurt most wasn't their fear for me. It was what Eva told Brian. "Rose isn't really my sister," she said, her voice trembling. Brian looked at her in shock. "What are you talking about?" "We found her in the forest when she was just a baby," Eva confessed. "Among a pack of dead wolves. My parents never told anyone because they didn't want her to feel different." Brian stared at her, processing this revelation. "Why are you telling me this now?" Eva hesitated. "Because I think she was the wolf who saved us last night." Brian's eyes widened. "You're saying Rose is—" "Maybe," Eva said, her voice breaking. "Or maybe not. But I know she was jealous of us, Brian. She hated what we had." Her words were like a dagger to my heart. I wanted to scream, to tell them I wasn't a monster, but I was too weak to speak. For days, I lay unconscious in the forest until a search party found me. When I returned home, everything had changed. Eva and Brian avoided me, their eyes filled with fear and mistrust. I wanted to explain, to tell them the truth about what happened that night, but they wouldn't listen. Eva had already convinced our parents that I was dangerous, that I was a threat to her happiness. They told me to leave. "I don't want to hurt Eva or Brian," I pleaded. "I would never hurt them." But no one believed me. They saw me as something dark, something unnatural. So I packed my things and left the only home I had ever known. Adeline's vision blurred with tears. She couldn't believe the depth of Rose's pain and rejection. I moved to a new city, far away from everything I loved. Without any qualifications or support, I took a job at a small coffee shop to survive. Every day was a struggle, but the hardest part was the silence. I wrote letters to Eva, begging her to forgive me, but she never replied. My parents didn't respond either. I was completely alone, haunted by the memories of what I had lost. I know I made mistakes. I know I let my jealousy consume me. But no matter what, I never stopped loving Eva. And I never stopped loving Brian. Now, as I write this, I wonder if they'll ever know the truth. That I wasn't a monster. That everything I did out of love. Adeline closed the diary, her hands trembling. The weight of Rose's story pressed down on her chest, leaving her breathless. She couldn't believe the secrets her family had hidden, the pain Rose had endured, and the love she had carried despite it all. Adeline wiped her tears and stared at the diary. There was still more to read, but for now, she needed a moment to process everything. Rose wasn't the villain her family had painted her to be. She was a flawed, heartbroken woman who had made mistakes, but had loved fiercely, even when it destroyed her. Adeline clutched the diary to her chest, her heart heavy with emotion. Rose's story wasn't over, and she knew she had to uncover the rest. For Rose, for Eva, and for herself. The room was quiet except for the rustle of the diary's pages as Adeline turned them. Her heart felt heavy, and her mind buzzed with curiosity and emotions she couldn't quite name. She leaned back against her bedpost and read on. One chilly afternoon, as I sat by the window sipping coffee, I noticed a little girl crying in the park near my apartment. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her tiny frame trembling with sobs as she clutched a stuffed animal. I approached her slowly, crouching to meet her eyes. "Hey there, sweetheart," I said softly. "What's wrong?" I can't find my mommy and daddy," she sniffled. "Oh, don't worry, love. We'll find them together, okay?" I scooped her into my arms, her tears soaking into my jacket. She nodded, clinging to me as though I was her lifeline. After calming her with some cookies and ice cream at my apartment, I contacted the police. An officer soon arrived and told me that the child's parents were on their way. When the door opened and I saw Ava and Brian standing there, my heart nearly stopped. Adeline's pulse quickened as she read about this unexpected reunion. It had been 5 years since I last saw Eva, and she looked as beautiful as ever, though her expression was sharp and guarded. Brian stood close behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," Eva said stiffly. Then her tone hardened. "Thank you, Rose, for not attacking my child." Her words hit me like a blow. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. The little girl, unaware of the tension, tugged at Eva's hand. "Mom, she's nice," the girl chirped. "She gave me ice cream and cookies." "That's enough, Adeline," Eva said curtly. I froze. Adeline. Her name echoed in my mind. "Mom, I want to invite her to my birthday party," Adeline said brightly. Eva's face darkened. "No." Brian placed a hand on her arm, as if to calm her, and nodded for Adeline to follow. My throat tightened as I watched them walk away. When I returned to my apartment, I noticed something small and soft on my bed, Adeline's favorite doll. I remembered how she had clutched it tightly when I first found her. I couldn't ignore it. She would be heartbroken without it, and I didn't want her to feel sad, not on her birthday. My hands trembled as I made the decision. Despite my fear of seeing Ava and Brian again, I walked to their home. Adeline paused, holding the diary tightly. Her eyes scanned the page, her breath catching as she imagined the scene. When I knocked, Brian opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to discomfort in an instant. "Rose?" he asked. "What do you want?" I pulled the doll from my bag and held it out to him. "Adeline forgot this," I said quietly. "I just wanted to return it." Before he could respond, Adeline's voice rang out. "Who's there, Dad?" She appeared at the door, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Rose!" she squealed, running toward me. To my surprise, she held up her arms, asking to be lifted. Hesitating, I glanced at Brian, who gave me a reluctant nod. Gently, I picked her up, and she wrapped her little arms around my neck. "I'm so happy you brought my doll back," Adeline said, beaming. "Thank you, Aunt Rose. You're so sweet." Brian shifted uncomfortably, his voice tense. "Adeline, Rose has other things to do." Adeline pouted. "But she's coming to my birthday party, right?" Brian's jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked to me. He didn't want me there. His expression made that clear, but Adeline was insistent, her small hands tugging at his sleeve as she begged him to let me come. Finally, he sighed. "If you don't have plans for killing anyone, you can come," he said sarcastically. "Really?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He stepped aside, leaving the door open. "Come in." Adeline, still in my arms, grinned. "I'm so glad you're here, Aunt Rose." I knew it wasn't just the doll she loved. There was something deeper, something pure, in the way she looked at me, as though she saw the person I wanted to be, not the person everyone thought I was. Adeline's chest tightened as she imagined her younger self clinging to Rose, oblivious to the tension in the air. When Eva arrived home and saw me sitting on the couch, she froze. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Adeline ran to her, holding the doll tightly. "Mom, Aunt Rose is staying for my birthday party." "No, she's not," Eva said firmly. "Rose, leave, now." Adeline's small face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, Mom," she begged. "Please let her stay. Just this once." Brian rubbed the back of his neck, looking conflicted. Eventually, he muttered, "Fine. She can stay." Eva's eyes burned with anger, but she didn't argue. Instead, she stepped aside, glaring at me as though daring me to make one wrong move. Later, I learned that Eva had called the police, asking for security at the party. Officers arrived, pretending to be Brian's friends, but their presence was a constant reminder of her mistrust. Still, I stayed. I stayed because of Adeline. Her laughter, her joy, her innocent love. It filled a hole in my heart I didn't even know existed. She didn't see my flaws or my mistakes. She only saw me, Aunt Rose. Over time, Adeline invited me to every birthday party, and I never missed a single one. I tried to mend things with Eva and Brian, but their walls never came down. They saw my love for Adeline, but they could never trust me. And yet, Adeline was enough. She was my light in the darkness, my second chance to love and be loved. I didn't need anything else. Adeline closed the diary, her hands trembling. Her younger self had adored Rose, but her parents' fears had created a rift that no amount of love could mend. That night, she lay awake, the weight of the truth pressing on her chest. Her heart ached for Rose, for her parents, and for the little girl who had seen goodness where others saw darkness. But one thing was clear. This was a secret she couldn't share. Not yet. The story wasn't over, and she needed to know more. The first rays of dawn broke through Adeline's window, painting the walls in soft golden hues. She blinked tiredly at the ceiling, her mind heavy with the whirlwind of emotions from the diary. She hadn't slept a wink, but the day's plans wouldn't wait. It was the long-anticipated picnic, and she couldn't let her friends, or Aunt Rose, down. Dragging herself out of bed, she got dressed and stumbled downstairs for breakfast. Eva was setting the table, humming softly, her apron dusted with flour. Brian was buried in the morning newspaper, his brow furrowed as usual. Adeline took a bite of her toast before asking, "Mom, why has Aunt Rose never married?" Eva stiffened slightly, her hands stilling over the plate she was holding. After a moment, she replied, "Well, that's a personal choice, Adeline, and since she's your friend, why don't you ask her yourself?" Adeline caught the edge in her mother's tone, but she decided to ignore it. She smiled and finished her breakfast, already eager to see Rose. Knocking softly on Rose's door, Adeline waited, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. A moment later, the door opened, revealing Rose's kind, familiar face. "Good morning, dear," Rose greeted warmly, her auburn hair shining in the morning light. "Good morning, Aunt Rose. Are you ready for the picnic?" Rose smiled. "I am. Let's go." As they walked toward the van, Adeline noticed her parents watching from the porch. Eva and Brian exchanged a quick, worried glance before Brian gave Rose a stiff nod. It was a look Adeline had seen before, a mix of suspicion and unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her parents' tension with Rose than she understood. The picnic spot was breathtaking, a shimmering lake surrounded by towering trees, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The sunlight sparkled on the water's surface, and the air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. Adeline's friends, who had initially been hesitant about Rose joining them, quickly warmed to her. Rose's charm was irresistible, and her quick wit had them all laughing within minutes. Adeline hung back, watching her aunt with a mixture of pride and curiosity. Rose seemed so normal, so kind. It was hard to reconcile this version of her with the stories in the diary. As the afternoon stretched on, the group packed up their picnic blankets and started toward the van. But before they could reach it, a bone-chilling howl echoed from the nearby forest. Adeline froze, her heart pounding. From the shadows of the trees, a pack of wolves emerged, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. "Run!" Rose shouted, her voice firm and commanding. The group sprinted toward the van, but Adeline glanced back in time to see Rose disappearing into the forest. "Rose!" she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the growls and snarls of the wolves. Inside the van, Adeline's friends huddled together, locking the doors. But Adeline couldn't sit still. "She's still out there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Adeline, it's too dangerous," one of her friends pleaded. But Adeline's heart ached with worry for her aunt. Ignoring their warnings, she opened the van door and stepped into the forest. The forest was dark and dense, the sunlight barely breaking through the canopy of leaves. Adeline pushed past thorny bushes and low-hanging branches, her ears straining for any sound of Rose. Finally, she heard voices. She crept closer, hiding behind a tree as she tried to make out the speakers. To her shock, it was Rose and Brian. "You shouldn't have come here," Rose was saying, her voice low and urgent. "I had no choice," Brian replied. "This is getting out of hand, Rose." Adeline's heart raced. What's going on? She thought. She stepped back, her foot snapping a twig. Rose's head whipped toward the sound, her sharp eyes scanning the trees. Adeline quickly retreated further, then shouted, "Aunt Rose! Where are you?" Rose stepped away from Brian, her expression immediately softening. "Adeline!" she called back, hurrying toward her. When Rose reached her, she knelt down, her hands gripping Adeline's shoulders. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous." Adeline's voice was small but firm. "I was looking for you. Are you okay?" Rose nodded. "I'm fine. The wolves attacked, but I managed to get away. Let's get back to the van." When they returned to the van, Adeline couldn't stop the questions swirling in her mind. "Aunt Rose," she said cautiously, "why didn't you come back to the van earlier? Running into the forest seems so dangerous." Rose hesitated, then offered a small smile. "I was nervous. I wasn't sure I could make it past the wolves, so I ran where I thought I'd be safe." Adeline nodded, but the answer didn't sit right with her. Back home, Eva and Brian were waiting on the porch. Brian looked up sharply as the van pulled in, his eyes darting to Adeline as though searching for answers. "Did you have a good time?" Eva asked, her voice tight with concern. Adeline smiled brightly. "The picnic was awesome, and Aunt Rose made it even better." Eva relaxed visibly, though Brian still looked on edge. "Good," Eva said, brushing a strand of hair from Adeline's face. "I'm glad you're okay." Adeline noticed the way her mother's hand lingered, as if she were checking for hidden wounds. As everyone settled in for the evening, Adeline replayed the day's events in her mind. Brian's presence in the forest nagged at her, an unanswered question that only added to the mystery of her aunt's life. She glanced at her bag, where the diary was safely tucked away. The truth was there, she was sure of it, and soon she would uncover it. Before heading to bed, she pulled Rose aside. "Aunt Rose?" she said quietly. Let's not tell Mom about the wolves. She'd only worry. Rose hesitated, then nodded. All right, dear. It'll be our secret. But as Adeline drifted off to sleep that night, her dreams were filled with howls and shadows. She couldn't help but feel that her family was keeping secrets, secrets that might change everything she thought she knew. The night passed slowly for Adeline, her restless thoughts making it nearly impossible to sleep. She clung to one certainty: Rose's diary would hold the answers. If there was something deeper connecting Rose and her family, something even her father, Brian, was hiding, Adeline was determined to uncover it. As the first rays of sunlight crept through her curtains, Adeline sat up, rubbing her tired eyes. She was sure of one thing. Rose would write about yesterday's events in her diary. She just had to wait for the right moment. Downstairs, the house was its usual mix of quiet chaos. Ava hummed softly while preparing breakfast, and Brian sat at the table, sipping his coffee, his face buried in the morning paper. Adeline exchanged pleasantries but kept an eye on Rose, waiting for her to leave the room. After breakfast, Rose excused herself, announcing that she was going to freshen up. Adeline's heart raced as she watched Rose head toward the bathroom. This is it. Quickly but quietly, Adeline slipped into Rose's room. Her eyes darted to the nightstand where the leather-bound diary lay. She grabbed it, opened it to the most recent page, and began taking pictures of its contents with her phone. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Rose stood by the slightly open door. She had heard the soft creak of the floorboards and knew someone had entered her room. Leaning out just enough to see, she spotted Adeline flipping through her diary, her phone in hand. For a brief moment, anger flickered in Rose's chest. The diary was personal, intimate. Yet as she watched Adeline's determined face, her anger melted into something softer. Rose sighed and stepped back into the bathroom. Let her read it, she thought. She deserves to know the truth. Maybe this is the only way. Adeline, unaware she had been caught, worked quickly. Once she had taken pictures of the latest entries, she carefully placed the diary back on the nightstand and hurried out of Rose's room. Once in her own room, Adeline locked the door and sat on her bed, scrolling through the photos. She read eagerly, her brow furrowing as she pieced together Rose's thoughts. The diary revealed much about Rose's emotions: her deep love for Adeline and Eva, her struggles to mend her broken relationship with her sister, and her constant longing to be a part of their lives. But to Adeline's frustration, there was no mention of Brian's presence in the forest. Adeline sighed, setting her phone down. Why was Dad there? And what was he arguing with Rose about? Her curiosity boiling over, Adeline decided to confront Eva. She found her mother folding laundry in the living room, the warm scent of fresh linen filling the air. Mom, Adeline began hesitantly, I need to talk to you about something important. Eva looked up, her eyes immediately soft with concern. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Adeline took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It's about Aunt Rose and... Before she could say more, Brian appeared in the doorway, cutting her off. Adeline, he said, his voice unusually cheerful. I have a surprise for you. Adeline blinked, caught off guard by his sudden interruption. A surprise? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Brian nodded, his smile wide but a little forced. Yes, something special. I've been planning it for a while. It's waiting for you at the park nearby. Why don't we go now? Adeline hesitated, torn between her curiosity about the surprise and her burning questions about Brian's behavior. Eva, who had been watching the exchange, gave Brian a puzzled look but said nothing. All right, Dad. Adeline said at last, deciding to play along. Let's go. The walk to the park was pleasant, but filled with tension for Adeline. The crisp morning air carried the scent of grass and dew, and the sound of birds chirping filled the silence between her and Brian. Adeline stole glances at her father, searching for any sign of nervousness. He seemed calm, almost too calm, as though he were deliberately avoiding a difficult conversation. When they reached the park, Brian led her to a quiet spot near a bench shaded by a large oak tree. Adeline's eyes darted around, expecting to see some grand gift waiting for her. A bike, maybe, or a beautifully wrapped box. But there was nothing. "Where's the surprise?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Brian hesitated, then gestured for her to sit on the bench.
"It's not exactly here yet," he admitted, sitting down beside her. "But I wanted to talk to you about something while we wait."
Adeline's heartbeat quickened. This was it. Whatever Brian was hiding, she was about to find out. "Talk about what?" she asked carefully. Brian opened his mouth to respond, but then he hesitated, his eyes scanning the park as though searching for someone or something. "Dad?" Adeline prompted. Brian finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Adeline, there are things about our family you don't know. Things I've tried to protect you from." Adeline's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" Before Brian could answer, a loud bark echoed from somewhere in the distance, startling them both. Brian stood abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line.
"We should go,"
he said suddenly, his tone firm.
"But—" "No arguments, Adeline,"
Brian said, his voice brooking no disagreement.
"Let's go home."
Adeline followed reluctantly, her mind racing. Whatever Brian was hiding, she was more determined than ever to uncover it. As they walked back, Brian seemed lost in thought, his jaw clenched tightly. Adeline didn't press him further. She knew he wouldn't reveal anything more. But one thing was clear. The truth was closer than ever, and she wouldn't stop until she found it. Adeline sat on her bed, her phone trembling in her hands. The pictures of Rose's diary stared back at her like a silent confession. She knew the truth was too big to keep to herself. Without hesitation, she forwarded the photos to Eva, along with a short message. "Mom, you need to see this. I think we've been wrong about Rose all along." A few minutes later, Adeline's phone buzzed. It was Eva. "Adeline, where did you get this?" Eva's voice was sharp, her shock barely concealed. "I took them from her diary," Adeline admitted, her tone soft. "I know it was wrong, but I had to know the truth." Eva was silent for a long moment, the weight of the revelations sinking in. "If what she's written is true," she began, but stopped herself. Doubt clouded her thoughts. "Adeline, what if she wrote these to mislead us, to make us trust her?" Adeline sighed. "Mom, she saved me and my friends during the picnic. She fought those wolves alone. Why would she do that if she wanted to harm us?" Eva had no answer, but her heart remained uneasy. Down the hall, Rose was preparing to leave. She couldn't shake the memory of seeing Brian in the forest. The bloodstain on his arm nagged at her thoughts, an ominous clue she couldn't ignore. Suddenly, a chill ran down her spine. She dropped her bag and rushed toward Eva. "Where's Adeline?" Rose demanded, her voice tense. Eva, startled by Rose's urgency, replied, "She left with Brian." "Why? What's going on?" Rose's eyes darkened with worry. "Where did they go?" "The park," Eva said hesitantly. "But Rose, what's wrong?" Rose grabbed Eva's arm, pulling her toward the door. "We don't have time to explain. Just come with me." The drive to the park was tense, with Rose gripping the wheel tightly and Eva struggling to keep up with Rose's hurried explanation. "I think Brian is dangerous," Rose finally said, her voice shaking. Eva stared at her, horrified. "What are you saying? He's my husband, Adeline's father." "I don't know for sure," Rose admitted, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But I saw him in the forest that night, Eva. There was blood on his arm. I think he might be one of them." "One of what?" "A werewolf," Rose said flatly. Eva gasped, her disbelief tangible. "Rose, this is insane." "Do you trust me or not?" Rose snapped. Eva hesitated but nodded. "If there's even a chance Adeline is in danger, I'll trust you." When they reached the park, the scene was eerily quiet. Neither Adeline nor Brian was anywhere to be seen. "They're in the forest," Rose said grimly, stepping out of the car. Eva followed reluctantly, her hands trembling. As they ventured deeper into the woods, Rose began to transform. Her skin rippled, her features elongating, her eyes glowing an unnatural amber. Eva froze, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. "Rose, what are you?" she whispered. Rose didn't answer. In her wolf form, she darted ahead, her powerful strides silent against the forest floor. Eva struggled to keep up, her heart pounding. Rose soon caught sight of them. Adeline and Brian standing in a clearing. Brian was speaking to Adeline, his voice low but urgent. Then the wolves appeared. A pack of them emerged from the shadows, their snarling forms circling Adeline like predators toying with their prey. Adeline screamed as the wolves moved closer, their sharp teeth gleaming in the dappled sunlight. Brian stepped forward, his calm demeanor vanishing. His body began to contort, his muscles expanding, his clothes tearing as he transformed into a massive, fearsome werewolf. Adeline stared, frozen in shock. "Dad! No! This can't be real!" Eva, who had finally reached the clearing, gasped audibly. She clutched a nearby tree for support as the truth unfolded before her eyes. Rose didn't hesitate. She lunged at the pack, her wolf form a blur of speed and fury. She tore into the attackers, her growls echoing through the forest. Brian turned toward Rose, his eyes blazing with rage. He charged at her, his claws swiping with lethal precision. The two werewolves collided in a ferocious battle, their snarls filling the air. "Adeline, run!" Eva screamed, but Adeline didn't move. "No, I can't leave her! You have to!" Eva grabbed Adeline's arm and pulled her back. "She's fighting for you, Adeline! Don't let it be for nothing!" Reluctantly, Adeline followed Eva, tears streaming down her face as they fled toward the car. Once they reached the safety of the vehicle, they locked the doors and sat in silence, their breathing ragged. "She saved me," Adeline said finally, her voice trembling. Eva turned to her, confused. "What are you talking about?" "At the picnic," Adeline explained. "When the wolves attacked, it was Aunt Rose who fought them off. She saved me and my friends." Eva stared at her daughter, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't know how," Adeline admitted. Eva leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. If Rose had saved Adeline at the picnic, then who had sent the wolves to attack? And then it hit her. "Adeline," Eva said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If Rose was protecting you, then the wolves, they were Brian's." Adeline's blood ran cold as the realization sank in. Her father wasn't just a werewolf. He was the enemy. The air was heavy with tension as Adeline and Eva sat in the locked car, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding. The forest loomed like a dark, living entity outside the windows. Suddenly, the underbrush rustled, and Brian emerged from the shadows in his human form. Dragging a battered and bloodied Rose behind him, Brian's expression was devoid of humanity, his face a mask of cold triumph. Rose's head hung low, her auburn hair matted with dirt and streaked with blood. She tried to lift her gaze to meet Adeline's, but her body betrayed her exhaustion. Brian stopped a few feet from the car and stared them down. "Step out," he commanded, his voice a growl of authority. Adeline and Eva hesitated. Brian sneered. "If you want me to let her go, there's only one condition. Adeline comes with me willingly. Her life for Rose's." Eva gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Brian, why are you doing this? She's your daughter." Brian's smirk deepened, his tone mocking. "Daughter? Oh, Eva, you always were naive. This was never about Adeline. It was you I planned to sacrifice. You were the perfect offering, but Rose ruined everything when she brought her wolves to the engagement that day." Eva froze. Horror etched across her face. "You wanted to sacrifice me? All this time?" Brian's gaze darkened. "Of course, and if it weren't for Rose, you'd be long gone. But now I have a new plan. Adeline will take your place." "No!" Eva screamed. "You can't do this!" But before Eva could act, Adeline stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but was firm. "Leave my Aunt Rose. I'll go with you." Rose's head shot up, her amber eyes wide with panic. "No! Adeline, don't!" But Brian's grin widened as Adeline began walking toward him, her steps deliberate. "Adeline, stop!" Eva yelled, panic overtaking her. "You don't have to do this." Adeline didn't turn back, her eyes locked on Rose, whose battered form tugged at her heart. "I have to, Mom. Rose has always protected me. Now it's my turn to protect her." Brian growled low in his throat, the sound sending a shiver down Adeline's spine. His body rippled as he began transforming again, his form growing massive, fur sprouting along his arms. His yellow eyes locked on Adeline. Adeline halted, terror taking hold. "Mother, help me," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. But Eva didn't move. Instead, her face contorted in fear, and she bolted from the car. "I'm sorry, Adeline," she cried, disappearing into the woods without so much as a glance back. Adeline's heart shattered as she watched her mother abandon her. She had always known Eva was selfish, but this betrayal was beyond anything she could have imagined. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't run. She stood tall, facing Brian. "Do your worst," she said, her voice trembling. Before Brian could pounce, Rose stirred. Despite her injuries, she summoned the strength to stand. With a guttural growl, she launched herself at Brian. The fight was brutal. Rose's weakened state was evident as she struggled against Brian's superior strength, but her determination never wavered. "Run, Adeline!" Rose roared, her voice raw with pain and effort. Adeline hesitated, torn between love for her aunt and the instinct to survive. "No, I'm not leaving you!" Rose pinned Brian to the ground for a brief moment, her amber eyes blazing with a fierce, protective love. "Adeline, please, go. Call for help." Adeline's chest ached as she made the hardest decision of her life. She turned and ran, her legs carrying her back to the car. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and called the police, barely able to get the words out through her tears. The minutes dragged on like hours. Adeline waited in the car, her heart hammering in her chest as the distant sounds of snarls and growls echoed through the forest. Finally, sirens broke through the oppressive silence, and red and blue lights bathed the trees. The police arrived just as Brian and his pack emerged from the forest, their retreat evident. Brian, now back in human form, tried to disappear into the chaos, but the officers surrounded him.
"You're under arrest," one officer said, his gun drawn. "For what?" Brian sneered, blood dripping from his mouth. "For attempted murder," the officer replied. "Your daughter called us, and we have evidence against you." Brian's face twisted in fury as he was cuffed and taken away. His pack scattered into the woods, their alliance broken. Adeline wasted no time. She ran into the forest, searching for Rose. Rose lay on the ground, barely conscious, her body battered and broken. Adeline fell to her knees beside her, tears streaming down her face. "Aunt Rose, stay with me. Help is on the way." Rose's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're safe. That's all that matters." "No, you matter too," Adeline cried. She clutched Rose's hand tightly, refusing to let go even as the paramedics arrived. At the hospital, Rose's condition was critical. Adeline stayed by her side, holding her hand through every agonizing moment. She whispered words of encouragement, reminding Rose of their bond. "You've always been there for me," Adeline said softly. "I wouldn't be here without you. I need you to fight, Aunt Rose. I need you in my life." Rose's recovery was slow but steady. When she finally opened her eyes fully, Adeline was there, her face lighting up with relief. "You're here," Rose murmured, her voice weak. "I'm not going anywhere," Adeline replied, her grip on Rose's hand firm. When Rose was discharged, Adeline made her decision clear. "I want to stay with you, Aunt Rose. I can't go back to Mom. She abandoned me." Rose's heart ached. "Adeline, she's your mother. I'm just your aunt." Adeline shook her head. "You're so much more than that. You've protected me, loved me, and never let me down. Mom only thinks of herself. I can't live with her anymore." Rose hesitated, emotion filling her eyes. "I've always loved you like my own," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Then let me stay with you," Adeline pleaded. Tears streamed down Rose's face as she pulled Adeline into a tight embrace. "You've made me the happiest I've ever been, Adeline." Brian's arrest brought peace to their lives. With him gone, the threats dissipated. Adeline and Rose moved to a quiet town where they began building a life together. Their bond deepened, shaped by trust, sacrifice, and unwavering love. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew they could face them together, hand in hand, heart to heart. For Adeline, Rose was no longer just her aunt. She was her protector, her family, and her home.